Well, hello and hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Supply Side. I'm your host, Tony Paquin, CEO of iRemedy. We're on a mission to demystify the crazy world of medical supplies and shed some light on its complexities, the challenges, and the potential solutions in this vital part of healthcare. Together with industry insiders and healthcare experts, we're going to dig deep, ask some tough questions, and maybe, just maybe, figure some things out. So let's dive in today's subject. But first, don't forget to press that subscribe button. Today, I'm super excited to talk about navigating the supply chain with my good friend, retired Navy SEAL, Captain Ryan Croley. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Tony, thanks for having me on. And it's been a little while, and I'm actually very, very happy to see you again.
Yeah.
So thanks again.
Yeah, we haven't had as much time to connect as we have had in the past. I miss you guys. Look forward to getting together. So
Yeah, well, let me just be more specific. I miss the daily, hourly, by the minute text that we would have back and forth for I don't know, about a year and a half.
about a
So
year and a
yeah, I
half.
feel like I'm missing part of my life. My
Yeah,
wife wanted me to thank you for ending this thing finally.
exactly. Yeah, I started every morning with you actually for about 2 years. So it was a strange way to wake up and check in on Ryan and see what crises happened overnight. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Actually, Ryan, we of course we have the book. We'll probably talk a little bit about the book and your role in the project we're talking about, which is Operation Warp Speed. But I'll just tell you, it's to me, you're kind of like the perfect guy for this conversation because you've got these three interesting qualities. One is your leadership experience and training as a result of the Navy SEALs, and then two is the fact that ultimately like me, you're pro-American. I mean, this is a bit of a patriotic discussion. I hate to kind of go there. Sometimes people get sensitive about it, but this is an important issue for the country. And then three, because of your work while in the Navy, but then also your work after the Navy, you're a supply chain guy. You understand, this exact subject that we're kind of, we've dug into, in the medical supply chain. And then finally, by the way, though, I want to make sure we talk for a while about Warrior for Life because that's to me just another super cool thing that I'm intrigued with, and it's the charity that you founded. I didn't realize that goes back like 10 years or so. So that's actually been out there a while. But it seems like it's
Yeah.
something that's really been heating up over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tony. Um, it was a, uh, it was a pleasure for me to participate in this. Me and my team, Jeantel, I wouldn't go anywhere without mentioning her as my right hand person. Um, I told her one time, talk about being patriotic, and I'll summarize our team by saying they weren't patriotic; they were heroic, right?
Yeah.
They they did things that were way above and beyond the normal call of duty with their own personal time, with their own focus, sharpness, and and even their own money in some cases. And I think you're one of them. I think a lot of us let a lot of things go in our lives for that period of time where we, as a very small team, just had to laser focus, solve problems, and get needles and syringes moving. I told Jeantel, and this was the time frame when we started working remotely, if you remember. And this is where like these calls that we're having now that we're like, let's do a podcast, really easy because we know how to do this, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we did 4 years ago.
No.
We didn't know how to get on calls. The interesting thing about going back to the heroic effort, I remember in being in Tel's house all the time, booming through her house, on video calls, and her family's scurrying around her, and at one point I stopped her son Chase. I mean, I'd never met Chase. It's COVID time frame, right? But I'm booming in his house all the time. I said, Mr. Chase. And he looks at the camera and he goes, yes, sir. And I said, do you know what your mom's doing for this country right now? And he looked at me and he goes, "No, sir." And I said, "I just want you to know that they're going to write books about this. And she is saving the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans. She's on the pointy end in doing it." And of course, Jean, she's like, "Get out of here," whatever. And I actually think that stuck with her a while. It stuck with me when I verbalized it and just reminded everyone and everything that was going on how important what a small group of us were doing and how we were doing it from our homes. And it was very, very interesting times.
I think you're right. What you're capturing is there was a mission there, and I think it's in your nature to sort of understand it that way, is that we were truly on a mission and we were having a real impact, and it was sort of thrust upon us. It was unexpected. I mean, it wasn't like a planned event where we all got together and said, "Hey, let's go save the world." It just kind of came, knocked on our door, and then we all rose to the challenge. Quite frankly, I mean, that's what happened. It was a unique, experience. I do want to touch on briefly, because I think it's important to get context. Is just give me, and we've talked obviously hundreds of hours, but for everybody listening to, let's talk. Just give me 5 minutes on how you ended up where you were, because you did 25 plus years in the Navy, as a SEAL, and then really developed those leadership skills. Because those skills, some people are born with them, some people develop them, and I don't know in your exact case, but you clearly became a leader, and it proved.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about it, and I mentioned it in the book, and I actually, when I signed your book, I don't know if that's the copy in the back that I signed, but I said something to the effect of "You saved the day," because we were in a world of hurt when you showed up, and
Yeah.
you had some great skills to turn us around there. So
That's great.
yeah,
I would love to speak about it just to give a little bit of context.
yeah,
But first, I'm going to tell you, Tony, you wrote in the book, you saved the day. And I opened the book and I showed it to my family. Um, and I think it made them understand how much time I took away from them and how important it was, because it's so easy to forget. I've had a lot of great leaders do that in the past, write just a handwritten note, sometimes to me, but it's really more intended for me to open the book and my wife to look over my shoulder and say, huh,
yeah,
maybe you did do something there. So closed the book and then moved on with it. I will tell you about, just quickly, the book. I read the book. I think it's great. I love all the detail, the sightings and the research that was done. I will tell you that I had much, much less anxiety and panic as I read the book than I did when we were actually going through the situation.
yeah,
So it was almost relaxing for me to see it. And when I first opened it up, I'm like, "Oh, here we go again." So, having said all that, so my career,
fine, yeah,
I spent 26 years in the SEAL teams. I've led at about every level from being a shooter, an assaulter, a sniper, lead climber, driving boats, doing that type stuff. Rose through the ranks, became a troop commander. After troop commander, I became an executive officer. Went to the War College up in Newport, Rhode Island, to get my master's degree, National Security Strategic Studies. Came back, served 4 tours as a commanding officer, SEAL Team 2, Task Force 16 in Iraq, Task Force 17 in Mosul. And then I spent about a year in a lovely, lovely place called Djibouti City, Djibouti, which is a city state um, over in East Africa, as the Special Operations Command Forward East African Commander. All in total, I spent about 12 deployments overseas. Some of them very rapid, some of them, getting calls, late in the night and having to go for a long period of time. And then some of them that were pre-planned and maybe a little bit longer, like that 9-monther that I described. So leadership, how did I learn leadership? I was taught. So I was taught through just a great group of mentors and senior leaders who took a little bit of time with me and gave me some some of their experiences pressed me in certain situations, left me hanging out to fail a little bit and then to come back and clean it up and get better over time. So I think that's about it, Tony. It all moved really fast, so it's hard to look back and remember sometimes, but it was a great time for me. It was a great time to serve the country because we were, the majority of my time in service was post 9/11. So things were very, very fast and furious, much like this Operation Warp Speed. So when we settled in, it was easy in one way. Finally, I'll tell you, the 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 tactics, the battle rhythm, as I like to call it, that we established when we started to gain control of this Operation Warp Speed, and providing 1.2 billion needles to the American people, 3 needles per person. The battle rhythm that we fell onto was that same battle rhythm that was taught to me and utilized through my military service. So when I said we got up in the morning, we got this ops and intel update, and then we started to target what we were going to do the next day and cycle through that. That was our man hunting philosophy that we used for a couple of years very effectively overseas after learning how to do it, quite frankly. So,
Well, for people who don't know, the story is that we're going through COVID, and at one point the government called and said, "Hey, we're going to need needles and syringes for the vaccine." And it was odd because we hadn't considered that. Everybody was focused on a bunch of other things, gloves and masks and just regular medical supplies. We are a medical supply company, so we supply hospitals, surgery centers, doctors, and so forth. But we just hadn't thought about the needles. So we ended up taking this contract, and as did a half dozen other vendors. And the other vendors just started to fail. So before we knew it, all of a sudden, we're kind of the last guy, and we had what turned into this outrageously massive order. And then, we're trying to get these needles and syringes produced. Well, they're only made in China. And this is kind of the essence of, our mission now is to talk about kind of a redomestication of the medical supply chain. But our massive reliance on this foreign power, becomes into play. Meanwhile, it's COVID, airplanes aren't flying, ships aren't shipping, there's no containers available, people are all working from home. The world is on fire, basically. And, meanwhile, you've got the Department of Defense who are pretty serious at their work. They take their job seriously there about, getting this product delivered. And we were just in, it was meltdown. It was world crises. And that's around the time that you stepped in. I think that was, around September, October of that year. It would have been, 2020. And you applied those skills. It was a remarkable 12 to 18 months that followed after that, right? We dealt with logistics problems and international relations and so forth, right?
yeah. So just to reflect, because you're bringing up some memories, how bad was the crisis at the time? It was so bad that families were dropping off their loved ones into hospitals and never seeing them again because they couldn't see them because of COVID and COVID restrictions. That's how bad it was. People with, and I'm having to plug in. I'm sorry, Tony. I don't think I plugged my computer in.
Sorry.
People that had pre-existing conditions were dying, and it was happening at large scale here in the United States, and there was nothing that we could do. And we were watching it happen to our loved ones, people around us, and here we have large, full spectrum contracts to deliver needles from China to the U.S. No ability to do it. Supply chains are locked down, and we just don't know what we're going to do. And at the same time, we're very emotionally invested. One, we're just like you said, we're patriots. We're just good Americans. We want to win. We see it around us. I mean, it was really, really tough times. I remember when I first, took over the contract, we weren't in a good place. It wasn't that my predecessor wasn't a smart guy. It was just we needed a new look. We needed we need to completely start over with this, because what we said originally is the case. It was just different. So they put me in place to run the contract, and my career, I didn't have a lot of experience managing contracts. I was a new retired captain out of the Navy, and walking in with one of the largest contracts that the U.S. let that year. And fortunately, I had John Tell next to me. But I'll never forget going into one of the first meetings that I had with the government. Everyone's taking notes because we're about to fail. They're about to give us what we call in government contracts is a cure notice. Means that they're going to write us a note telling us that if we don't fix this thing, they're going to fire us immediately, which we did get right after the meeting. But I sat down with the government and I told them, hey, they said, what do you need, Ryan? And I said, I need you guys to start acting like a superpower. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I said, you signed a firm fixed contract for a price for a needle 6 months ago, 4 months ago, whatever it was. I said, here we sit today. The world's changed. There are no ships going anywhere, no airplanes going anywhere. Our loved ones are all dying across the world. People are showing up at the factories in China where we have contracts with literally bags of gold, buying your needles out from underneath us. And I'm standing over there with a firm fixed price contract. Yeah. And they looked at me and I said, start acting like a superpower. Go get the needles. And they rewrote the contract for us. I don't know if you remember, that's when we shifted.
I'm telling you, that's like the magic of the moment, because what you're saying, I knew, but I would never be the guy that could have that conversation with the government. Like, first off, I don't have the credibility, but also, I don't know how to do that. And I just would never, I wouldn't have been able to do that. It took somebody with your history, your reputation, and plus just your knowledge and commitment to the process. But you knew how to have that talk with them. And it was that way. I mean, it's hard to describe. I know we try and do it in the book, but the world, I just described it as the world was on fire. We couldn't get ships. We couldn't get airplanes. The factories were, screwing us. The Chinese Communist Party was involved. And, it was a wild time. But meanwhile, people were dying. And this is the weird thing about COVID. It became so politicized that we in many ways have lost sort of memory, and that it was a true healthcare crisis. Now, I come down on the side of the government shouldn't mandate vaccines. So I kind of get that political position. Well, I very much get that political position. But at the same time, I'm a hospital guy. I had hospital clients, they couldn't protect their employees. They had employees getting sick. And what you're referring to is somebody would go in to the hospital, they'd go into the emergency room, they'd be very sick, they'd be dying, they'd put them into intensive care, they'd put them onto a ventilator, and they would end up dying, but they could never see their loved ones through that process because they were isolated. It was tragic. And to your point, we were dealing with that very close at hand. I had clients and we all had relatives and friends that were suffering that way. But meanwhile, we would get up in the morning and deal with this battle that went on for, what we did. Those were 12, 18-hour days. In a way, they were practically 24 hours because you're always on the phone with London or China or Hong Kong or somewhere else. So you're dealing with all these different time zones. And but when we look back, people tend to forget really the damage of that time and what a horrible experience it was. Very real, the suffering that occurred as a result. So it was a very emotionally charged period that we were going through. I remember one of your lines, though, was always, because you told me this many times, that you would say, well, bad news doesn't get better with time. And we'd be like, because we'd wake up in the morning and go, yeah, we had a jet crisis last night. He'd be like, well, the first thing we got to do is we got to call our contact at the DOD and tell them what's going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was. And I think the one thing that they appreciated about me and my team was we were direct, and if we were wrong or if there were bad news, we worked it, and we let them know as soon as we can, and then we just started working the problem. I convinced him on the backside of the bad news doesn't get good with time thing. When I would translate that over to the government, I would say, hey, bad news is not going to get better, so I'm going to tell you what's going on. But then I would also tell them, I'm your best horse in the race. Like, we're the ones that are going to, no one can solve this better. It didn't work, but I'm telling you, we're the best horse.
Yeah.
And after time, when we would start showing them what we're doing to solve that problem, how we're communicating, not just tactically, not just at the customs office in Tianjin, China, but through our official communications at the Department of State, through multiple different methodologies, we're attacking this problem from all different directions. Just to get one guy to swipe a badge or get something going or do whatever. They realized that we had a multifaceted, sophisticated, full spectrum approach to solving the problem, as our team had, and that's why they stuck with us. If this doesn't work, we're pivoting to the next thing. If that didn't work, we're flexing to the next thing, and we were always putting these solutions together. Midway through the contract, Tony, you remember, like every day, I'm on the phone talking to people who own airplanes.
Yeah.
Every single day. And it was always a different airplane. It was always a different configuration. It was always, what can we get in this size, shape airplane? And I remember telling you one time, funny, I said, Tony, I don't ever want you to do airplane math again. Right? You're a healthcare guy. Go do healthcare. Let me worry about what can get in an airplane, where it can get in and out of, and how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're like, but this, get your fingers out in your calculator. And I'm like, stop. CEOs don't do math. Right? Don't do airplane math.
Yeah.
And it was one of my favorite lines, back at you. So that's the way it was. Strangely enough, what I think a lot of people don't know is one of the, our workhorse for airplanes, if you remember, was the Canadian Air Service.
Yeah, it was a weird deal. And we would fly in and they would route them into Chicago. Yeah. Yeah.
2 767s per week just kept going because they had the extra capacity. Their mail service only took those two planes to deliver throughout Canada. So they had one more route each plane that they would fly for the week. So we pounced on through another key partner, Crane Worldwide, and specifically Dan Ivey.
Yeah.
Do you remember that former military guy that was their logistics guy? He was in my ear all the time. What a great team! What a great team we had.
The
So
Crane guys were an important asset to this deal. There's no question about it. That's and they weren't planned in the beginning. Remember, at the beginning, we just thought we were going to go solve this problem somehow easily. And then we ended up talking to Crane, and they stepped in and said, "Well, this is a pretty complicated problem." And even for them, they were worldwide logistics people, but they were good workers day in and day out. They partnered up in a positive way.
Yeah, and a little bit of they bid on this contract as well, but again, they did what's called an LPTA bid to win the contract, lowest price technically acceptable. So that's their contract was LPTA, and they're trying to buy airplanes that cost anywhere between one way, an airplane that costs between 600, 1,000, and 1.4 million, just depending on what's going on. It could be a typhoon. It could be a Chinese holiday, which you and I all have memorized now. It could be American holidays, Christmas. all those factors that you just can't control um, change the cost of the airplane that much, and the margins just weren't there. So we all just started losing money. Um, and a lot of companies put themselves at risk, to make the mission happen. So, um, yeah, when I go back to anxiety, and I don't feel the anxiety when reading your book right now, it's a good thing.
Yeah, that was I think writing the book was a bit of catharsis for us to kind of work our way back through that. And, at least at the end of the day, I mean, we all suffered massive financial damage, but we did get the mission done. And, we can live with that. There were some very hard decisions that had to be made during that process. But at the end of the day, there was a medical mission that needed to happen, and it wouldn't have happened without us. I mean, what would have happened if in January 2021 we turned and walked away? I don't know that there was a national plan B. You know.
Yeah, and you know, geopolitically and all the other things that were happening at the same time, and you mentioned it in your book, and I didn't think about it while it was truly happening. We did talk about it, but it kind of it reminded me loud and clear in the book. We could not land a military airplane in China to
Mhm.
unload needles and syringes for the U.S. We were directed not to do that. They weren't going to allow that to happen. And
Right.
the way that that would have looked from a U.S. perspective would have been very bad messaging for
Mhm.
the political administration that was in there, also for the American people, just to lose confidence that, hey, we Americans don't have what we need. So we've launched, a couple of C-17s, which wouldn't even have made a dent.
That's
We
the
flew
that's
100.
the thing. We'd have 500 of them. Yeah.
We'd have to fly 167 of them because the 747 is a much larger airplane. We flew over 100 of those. But the messaging would have just been off, you know. So, we had these limitations on us that we could not use military aircraft. We could not use Russian aircraft because of the Fly American laws that were passed. If you remember, we had the largest airplane built that flies today, the
Yeah.
Antonov, under contract
Yeah.
to fly from the U.S.
And by the
or
way,
to fly from.
we had a pretty good
Yeah,
deal on that aircraft. I mean, it
yeah,
was like $600,000 or $700,000, and it was
yeah.
a massive capacity solution. That would have been a good solution. Yeah,
On contract and rolling, and then we get a protest from an American company that
yeah,
says based on the Fly American Act. So we had to stop. And again, we've got these companies bickering over what airplane we're going to use, and we had to do an airplane. Had to. Nothing was moving in and out of ports. We
mhm,
had to start moving things via air. Now we got American companies protesting, and they can't even fly the capacity that we need.
right.
So Americans were just hurting each other. And this is when it comes back to we were a patriotic team. All of us that were working were willing to sacrifice some of our own paychecks, some of our own opportunities, some of our own financial health in the Iremedy case, and even in the Gold Belt case, they were willing to risk their financial health to
Yeah,
make this happen because they knew it was just such a righteous mission that needed to be done. But then we're dealing with these other companies that were just not on board, so it just made it really complex.
yeah, yeah. And that's where, in my experience, I go back 20 years in this business, and we were all sort of aware of this, globalization thing. That it just sort of snuck up on you. It's a little bit of the frog in the pot of water on the stove that you slowly warm up, and before you know it, he's being boiled to death. But it globalized slowly over the last 30 years, but now we've arrived at this place where we're wholly dependent. I mean, at the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party could have said, no, screw you guys. we're just not going to ship anything to the U.S. They could have done that. I mean, it's like,
Very short periods of time they did do it.
yes, exactly, right?
They did. Yeah.
It was that precarious, and we would have then there would have been you that would have been it. You would have been done. I mean, there's no way there was absolutely not non-China global capacity that would supply the needles needed for the United States. It would have been possible. We would have not deployed the vaccine without China's support. As bizarre as that statement is, that's
Yeah. There's no doubt. And keep it in mind, there are multiple levels of quote unquote China support. You have the communist Chinese government, and then you had the local municipalities that were actually extorting us as well,
yeah.
and wanted money and wouldn't allow things to move outside of their provinces without extra VAT taxes and other things. So we're trying to consolidate the Berlin airlift, if you will, out of Shanghai, because that's where our airplanes could fly in and out of. And then we started getting hit by these local municipalities that would not allow trucks to move.
Mm-hmm.
So it was another thing. So the Chinese Communist government is giving us the thumbs up. The local Chinese are like, no, we're not. So it was just a constant situation. And then our own government couldn't get out of their own way there sometimes too. So there was a lot of that, those issues that we had to deal with, a very complex environment, and figure out where we needed to shoot our silver bullets and where we needed to put our body armor on and take some hits. And I think that's what we were doing every day.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. That was like an everyday experience for a solid year of, crises resolution. I would literally, wake up in the morning, whatever, 5 a.m., go to my phone, go to WhatsApp, see what happened in China last night, because it'd be 5 p.m. there. And there was, almost every day there was some sort of crisis that was catastrophic. So you do that for a year. It was just a remarkable thing. But then you'd wake up, you'd work the problem, and go at it through some other. We'd have another factory, and more demand for money. We had the bizarre, extortion events occur, and the robberies, and all these unusual things that you just you know couldn't understand or expect.
Yeah.
They all come from, though, goes back to, we shouldn't even be in this place and in this position in the first place. I mean, we've got to have some basic form of self-reliance, and at the very least, or be dependent upon more allied nations. I mean, countries that have an alignment with our basic belief systems. I think that we forget, while there's great Chinese people, and I actually can speak to the one, remember there was the guy who, he always went with the name Eric or Scott or something, but he was the guy that ran the export facility at the airport. He was the one alerting us to the fact that that aircraft was going to turn around. So turn around without loading was the story in the book, and risking flying empty. And it was interesting because he's the one that was having the morality moment, right? He was going, this is just wrong. So it's so in his case,
Yeah.
Chinese gentleman, he was pointing out that, hey, you guys are about to be robbed, and he was trying to look out for our interests. A little bit of looking out for his interests as well, but nonetheless. But the government, the Chinese Communist Party, I'm sorry, but I just can't. They don't believe in individual rights. They don't believe in protection of the people at all, and they certainly don't care about the American people. And we've ran into circumstances where they're using slave labor. So I don't know that we in the United States want to be wholly dependent upon the CCP, which is where we are right now, and where we were. Yeah.
Or wholly or dependent at all. I mean, it it doesn't make sense. And hopefully with, the development of technologies and other things, um, we can pull some of that manufacturing back here without having to have an hourly worker that doesn't make, below or makes below minimum wage. That we can figure out how to reach our national security needs through technologies or through partners with countries that have a like mindset with us, or to buy down the risk and move it into multiple countries and do that. Absolutely. I think that's in our best interest. The guy who came up with the idea of just in time logistics, um, clearly did not predict what was going to happen with the shutdowns during COVID. There's a couple other things when I talk shutdowns with COVID that we didn't even talk about. I mean, if there were a COVID outbreak, say at Chicago O'Hare Airport, they would shut the entire thing down for a week. The same thing with Shanghai or Tianjin. And over there, they were much, much more aggressive in shutting down. They would basically arrest everybody who was even close to it and lock them down for a month.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at the government and they're like, hey, where are my needles and syringes? I'm like, they're on the tarmac right there. And they're like, move them. I'm like, the Chinese government just rounded up everyone and put them in jail for a month because they had a COVID outbreak.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, that can't be real. And it's like, and we, through our sources, we confirmed it. And that's the case. So we're pivoting to another factory somewhere else, and trying to get another airplane into another location while we're waiting for that, for that team of workers in China to move. So it was just every day it was something. Every day.
At one point, we talked about flying over there and getting a visa. Remember, and I think you talked to the State Department on that because we wanted to put eyes on the problem, go over there and kind of see these factories. But then the Chinese said, "Well, you can do that, but we're just going to put you in a hotel room and put an armed guard at the door and keep it locked up for 2 weeks." So there was no reason to go in the end. But they were extremely serious about locking down when they locked down. They locked down a city. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tony, the plan was it was a credibility thing, because I wanted to look back at the government who I was speaking to and not lie to them and be direct and honest with them and just build as much credibility as I could on my side. I wanted to look at them and say, I've done it. I've flown over there. So I was going to fly over, never get out of the cockpit, load and fly back.
Yeah.
Just to say that I observed it from there, because it was like flying to the moon for some of them. They just didn't understand what it took, how long the aircraft was in the air, the route it was taking, where it was landing, and if we missed schedules, how tight the windows were to move those airplanes. So when you start talking all those details, like if that plane takes off 4 hours late out of Shanghai, we may not be able to get it in over here. So it was just all these crazy timelines that you had to understand at a level that you don't want to understand.
Yeah, we had to micromanage raw materials to get to the factory, to make the product in the right configuration, to get a truck, to get the trucks, drivers and the trucks, and to your point, to get the local Communist Party to allow those trucks go between cities, to go from some place 600 miles away and work its way down to Shanghai, then coordinate your aircraft coming in, loading that aircraft in that window that you're talking about. So there's this really complex process. But meanwhile, I remember at one point, there were these tips that were used in the manufacturing process. And they were like consumables. They would get used up, so they'd have to get replaced. And it turns out that in all of the world, in China, there's one guy that makes these tips, and it's some small little family-owned business. And this guy, he makes the tips. Well, without him, the whole thing shuts down. And it was like a crisis. We're like, oh, we got to get a hold of the tips guy. We got to work this out. We got to solve that problem. Because meanwhile, the aircraft can't fly. Everybody's upset. The factories can't manufacture. The trucks can't drive. The whole thing falls apart because we can't get the tips.
Yeah,
Just absolutely bizarre.
Tony, there's so much we could tell stories all day that would all be interesting, funny,
Yeah.
and scary, of just about where we are with our supply chain and what we're reliant on. And I saw an article the other day, wander a little bit and talk about the Navy. I still follow the Navy pretty large. Now, I wasn't really part of the larger Navy. I spent my time in the separate special operations community, but I do truly consider myself a naval officer. You know, so I track things like aircraft carriers and airplanes and how many there are and how we produce them, how we manufacture them, how we do all these things, because it's important to understand as part of my national security, kind of education and background that the Navy got me. So I remain interested. I see articles about why do we have 11 aircraft carriers? That doesn't make any sense. Or why do we make so many airplanes? And it doesn't make any sense. We get scrutinized, congressional oversights, reviews. A lot of the general population, they have questions because it's their dollars, it's their treasure that's being spent on these things. I think what people need to understand when it comes to military machinery, tanks, aircraft, um, you name it, is that there's somebody with a really high end skill set that makes that tip, for example, for our airplanes or for our tanks or for whatever machinery. You've got to maintain that guy. He has a livelihood. He has a family. He has everything that you and I have that we need. If you want to keep that guy on the hook, ready to rapidly produce more tips or more engines or more whatever, you've got to continue to pay him and keep him going and keep him on site and keep him so that he's always maintaining such awareness and the ability to do that. And then you have to have the ability to scale rapidly. So from going to making one or two airplanes a week to being able to do 100 in a week. And you need to do that within a year. So that requires so much planning and thought and money to do that. But that's how we protect our country.
Mhm.
And the same, I think, is true in healthcare. You have to apply it the same way. Like, okay, we have to maintain a capability here in the United States, and it may not be cost effective for us to make needles and syringes in the United States. It may not be, but by God, the United States has got to do it here. They've got to subsidize it, and then they've got to have a team on the backside of it every day ready to scale it from just running 3 lines to running 300 lines in 30 months or 30 days to running 1,000 lines in 6 months to running 5,000 lines in 1 year. That's what we have to do. And unfortunately, as you and I both know, that hasn't been done yet.
No.
Although it's been recommended, it's been pushed, people have advocated for it. Um, the legislator has agreed, but it hasn't been done.
Mhm.
So here we sit again, as vulnerable as we were 4 years ago.
The interesting part is what we were talking about earlier is we sort of forget, and I would have thought that COVID would have been one of those classic Pearl Harbor moments where we'd wake up and go, oh my God, we gotta get in the fight, so to speak. And we didn't. We had that emotional response during and shortly after COVID, but now we sit here and we're sort of like lulled into complacency. Part of it is you have to recognize the threat. The threat is real. And I don't know that it's different today. If you go back 50 years, war was all kinetic. We knew who our enemies were. They were dropping bombs on us. It was much clearer. Today, you have all these, different kinds of problems. You have economic wars, right? You have diplomatic wars. You have, we're at war with Iran right now, but not really. It's through, various other, you know, agents, so to speak. So it's a much more complex thing, and the medical supply chain is one of those. Yeah, it's a life-giving supply chain that we don't control, we're not dependent upon. And at any given time, if somebody wants to use that against us, they're going to be able to do that unless we take that action that you're describing.
Mhm.
It's hard, takes time, takes money. So
Yeah.
we'll see if the commitment is there.
Yeah. It's a hard problem to solve. What you're describing, Tony, and you and I talked about this before, there are the levers of national security or national power. They're really four levers: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Those are the things that the United States can push and pull and push on to make our adversaries or our partners respond to what the needs are of this country. And you're talking about the economic piece, and it's you know we just haven't invested in it, and it's going to be shame on us if it
Yeah.
happens again.
Mm-hmm. So
I have a stack of needles and COVID tests still in my garage. So
we were moving offices around, and right outside my door, there's a couple boxes of Tianjin shipped, 1 milliliter syringes sitting out there, and I
the
don't
originals.
I don't know if it's PTSD when I look at that box or whatever, but I do kind of avoid touching it. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, like how many boxes do you think we moved? You could do the math, I suppose, but it was 500 million syringes. So if there were 100 per box, we moved 5 million boxes.
Well, I'm gonna tell you a little thing that JT and I used to talk about, because we used to sit here and do math all the time on this and on our phones. The numbers of zeros was so large that we couldn't actually use the real numbers.
Right,
That
exactly.
that's how
That's how it
that's
was.
how big it was.
Yeah, yeah. That was amazing. By the way, you commented earlier, but I got to come back to. I love Chantel. She's an
Yeah.
amazing person, a real professional, another real steady working operator, high quality American person. Just a. I love high quality people, and she falls into that category absolutely. So
Yeah.
she was great to have.
Former Navy, former Navy, very professional. Had been working contracts for a long time. Again, just a very, very dedicated American, and sharp as a whip, fit. Just all the attributes that you see in a very, very strong leader. Can manage time, can manage pressure, is not emotional. She was ideal for this situation. I think The Rock for the whole thing. I mean, I'd get mad and upset. I mean, you'd get mad and upset, and JT would she's like, just give me the facts. Just give me the facts. So,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, it was great friend, and lifelong friends. When
yeah.
you go through the crucible, like I think we all did here. I I refer to it in my old line of work as combat love. When you've been in the fight
Mm,
with a teammate where bullets are going over your head and you're maneuvering left and right, doesn't matter for the rest of your life. You have a different affection for that person, and you'll do anything that you could for them to help them out, personal or professional or otherwise. So I think our group has that. You know, those
mhm.
of us who went through that closely.
Yeah, I agree with you. My team now, and of course, Amanda and obviously Anthony and others, right now, we are a highly efficient, really, really high performance team. And it's, I think, the exact same thing. We've been together for 10 years, so it was already a relationship. But boy, we got tough and sharp, and on my side, it was Amanda, it was your Chantel, but she just
Yeah.
grinded through the details. And in the end, as we're trying to make sense out of that chaos, because we're still unraveling the financial impact, one thing about her and her team is they had absolutely perfect record keeping
Yeah.
and in accounting. And that sounds like nothing, but when you recognize the war that we were in and just just the unreal amount of activity that this small company took on, I mean, it was just
Yeah.
unbelievable. So same story. She would just get up and put a smile on her face and grind it out. It was amazing.
Tony, one of uh, uh, one of my favorite leaders that I ever worked for was General Stan McChrystal, and I worked pretty directly for him for a long, long time. And he used to say two things that stuck with me for the rest of my time, and I always tell this to people. One is it's all about relationships. That's how you make things work. It's trust in relationships.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to step into a situation that they don't know unless they absolutely have to without trusting relationships around them. The other thing is freedom of credibility gives you freedom of action. So if you're credible, you can do more than you could ever imagine. When it, as this applies to Amanda, specifically, Amanda always had the right information, right? And she could have pounced on some people, but you know what Amanda had that other people these type of situations didn't have? She had the delivery. So
Mhm.
she could deliver good news, bad news, call somebody out, get called out in a tough situation, and she could deliver it right back with calm and keep everyone right where they needed to be
Mhm.
because she understood relationships, to a higher level. So again, just
Yeah.
another key player on the team that had a higher level of understanding, I think, than most people, kind of social IQ, if you will.
No, your observation is spot on. Relationships are very important to her, but she adheres to the truth, very very tightly, and she's able to combine those two things
Yeah.
into a good operation. Hey, before we run out of time though, because I don't ever want to talk to you without talking about Warrior for Life. I've always just loved that work that you're doing. I know it's the real passion that you're involved with right now, and I always want to help out everything we can do there. I think it's such a great story. At the end of the day, this is what matters. Like, I'm a bit. I remember you and I had a conversation one time about some supply chain stuff, and there was the allegation that the supplier was using slave labor in China, which they clearly were. And I told you, I said, well, I can just choose not to do business with those people, and that's what I'm going to do. I still believe that, you know, doing the right thing matters. Call me old fashioned, but I'm still there. I'm always going to be there. I mentioned this a little bit when I talked about you and Chantel and my team is, good people is what gives me faith in the country. I still believe we have a lot of great people doing great stuff in this country. And, I'm going to just choose to be on that side. I can sleep nights as a result by, trying to do the right thing. And look, we all do stupid shit. We make mistakes. We do all that. But at the end of the day, if we're driven by a good purpose, I think it works out. And if we adhere to the truth and we're credible and we have integrity, then I think we end up in the right place. So anyhow, let's talk for a moment about Warrior for Life, man. Just give us an update on what's going on there. It's been an exciting 6 months there, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably my one of my favorite things to talk about and to do. And between my wife and I, we probably both spend between the two of us 80 to 90 hours a week on it because we're just super passionate about what we're doing. So
Right.
Warrior for Life Fund is a 501c3 public charity, and we're really centered and based on the sport of hockey. So we play hockey, veterans hockey. We have an adaptive hockey program We've had the U.S. national gold medal Paralympic team visit us every year for the past 3 years. And when I say Paralympics, I'm not referring to the Special Olympics. I'm referring to the Parallel Olympics that was created after World War II because we had all these amazing athletes that were at Olympic level, and we needed to create a parallel Olympic for them so that they could compete with disabilities. I call those learned disabilities, a disability that they learned, throughout their, as they matured through their life. So we have an adaptive program, an active duty veterans program, and Paralympics, and we really, really focus on Gold Star families. So Gold Star families are our families, direct family members of those that we've lost in the line of duty on active duty here recently. Just this past week, we lost 2 more guys
Yeah,
out on the West Coast.
I read that. I thought they were. I know they were in your community, so I thought you may have
Yeah.
some
So
connection.
I think it goes sometimes very misunderstood with some of these large concentration areas. I'll talk about Norfolk, Virginia Beach, where I live. I live in the highest concentration of active duty military veterans and Gold Star families in the world, right? We are the epicenter of what has gone on since 9/11. I can't walk down the street without saying hello to a Gold Star family. I can't go to a mall. I can't go anywhere with seeing a guy that I've served with somewhere, or his family, or his family members, um, or a guy that is dealing with this disability. And there really is no resources consistent, or what I term as persistent presence, always here, always available, always ready for something. So that's what we are at Warrior for Life Fund. We are persistent presence inside the community. So I talked about hockey, and like, this is where people get confused. They're like, you guys play hockey and you're persistent and you're in this community. That's what it is. It's really not hockey, right? It's really about camaraderie, peer-to-peer contact, being the best athlete that you can be. There's a little bit of cognitive mental health stuff that we do through some mental health providers. My wife being a speech pathologist, brain injury specialist. So we've combined all these things together into something we call the Human Performance Center. The Human Performance Center is adjacent to the rink, so we go have our time at the rink, and then we go to the Human Performance Center, have a coffee, have that peer-to-peer engagement, be able to refer out to other supporting entities, whether they be hospitals, whether they be therapies, whether they be other nonprofits, or if we can handle what's going on here with us, we do that. But we're always available for families. Last example I'll give you is just last year we lost a gentleman, just an incredible human being, Mike Ernst, and his kids were who are 3 and 6, were huge into hockey, wanted to just be hockey players like their dad. So we introduced ourselves to them, got them out on the ice, taught them how to play the game in a very small setting. This isn't public skate. This is me and a couple of other guys. Got them on skates, got them learning how to play. We just took them up to Boston, had a great event in Boston with them last week, and just kind of showed them how the American people feel about them, right? So this is how we as a country honor you. It's not about Warrior for Life doing it, but it's about we as a country are recognizing what you have sacrificed and given. And that falls into one of our final pillars. And that pillar is, I'm trying to give these families lasting memories that they're going to remember for a long time. Remember our trip to Boston? Remember our trip to San Diego, where we came together as a family and went and did something. And we Warrior for Life Fund, we just kind of back away and let them do their thing. Finally, I'll tell you, we have the trust of the community here because I live in it every day. So it's kind of nice. It's a good thing. It's something that I protect as much as I can, which is their trust, and that what I'm going to do with their photographs, pictures, and stories will be appropriate. So that's what I do. And I know you can tell the passion, and I would talk about it all day if you'd let me.
Yeah, well, I would always talk about it all day because it's just a great program, and I'm glad you're committed to it. It's one of those sacrifices that people make. I mean, it's not like you're making a ton of money, running the program. That's not what that's about. You're doing it out of personal commitment and sacrifice.
If
And
zero means not making a ton, that would be an accurate statement.
yeah, I know that. I know that your commitment is over the top. So, as I said, we're always supporters. We love it. I love the story. I follow it. I see everything that you're doing, and I know that you've had just a big year with the
Yeah.
program. There's a lot of big things happening. So, it's getting
Yeah.
momentum.
Well, Tony, I learned a lesson from you, right? So I leveraged everything I had for something that I was completely dedicated to and loved. And we're flying by a shoestring right now, but you know what? It's good because I feel like I'm making a difference for the right reason. And then long term, everything will work out.
Yeah,
So
you have to believe that, right?
yeah,
I'm with you on that. So, and if we're wrong, well, at least it was for a good cause and it had a purpose. But we won't be wrong. We'll be right. And in the end, we'll stick to it and we'll win. So I'm with you 100%. Well, Ryan, we've run out of time. We could do this a lot. I always love doing this. I think, as I
yeah,
mentioned at the beginning, you've got those qualities that I think just fit this conversation. It's about leadership, it's about supply chain, but it's also about being a good American. I think that's a lost art in this country, and we need to be recommitted to it. And I think in the years to come, we'll realize the importance of that as we continue to see the geopolitical, situation change or unravel. But really wanted to thank you, for this time. Love it. You're a great guy. Always happy to spend time with you. So, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today on the supply side. I'm Tony Paquin. I was here today with Ryan Croley. It's been a great pleasure sharing insights and engaging in these discussions about the healthcare industry. We hope we're leaving you with some new ideas to ponder. Remember, positive change begins with understanding and dialogue. So let's continue this conversation. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and let's make a difference together. Don't forget to like, comment, and share if you enjoyed this conversation. Take care, everybody.
thanks, Tony.